Here we go. Jake and Josh are here to analyze the game they love for the team they love. This is another Dolphins Podcast. Here's your host, Jake Mendel and Josh Houtz.
To get to another edition of another Dolphins Podcast. It is a big show, and we are dedicating it to the quarterbacks. We are going to discuss an NFL.com report that Tua Tagovailoa's contract could be worth $55 million. And then we're going to start getting comfortable with this year's draft class at quarterback. Joining me today to talk all things quarterback, Joshua Houtz, Brian Catt. Gentlemen, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's going to be the first weekend where there is absolutely no football. But you know what? It's just over 2 months from the NFL draft, a month from free agency. Looking forward to it.
No football sounds like absolute hell. I have the baby sleeping here. As I was telling Jake before I came on here, the other one was going exorcist all day long. Had to pick her up at school. So I'm just happy to be able to get away from all that and be able to talk about the quarterback position, the Miami Dolphins, and some of this absurd reporting about $55 million for Tua. But I'm doing pretty well, Jake. How have you been?
Some super interesting talk. Shout out Invisalign. Great what they do. Don't go months without wearing your retainers, because if you try to put them back in, you do wake up the next morning feeling like you've been punched in the mouth 50 times. Outside of that, we're doing pretty good. And Kat, I got to ask you, man, because it's so tough this time of year, because there is an NFL news cycle, and I think it actually works pretty well with a regular person's day. Like if you work 8 to 4, 9 to 5, I think you kind of get out of work at a good time to see all the information. It's not the case during the off season. So I'm sitting there, I'm scrolling at about 2 p.m, and I just see a Barry Jackson post, Barry Jackson, reporter for the Miami Herald, going on this huge rant about how Tua Tagovailoa's next contract could be upwards of $55 million. Now, I do want to talk about the report, but first, what would go through your head just scrolling and that being the first thing you see on a random February Wednesday afternoon?
Well, I'll answer 2 questions you didn't ask. Number one is, does Tua deserve a contract of $55 million? And to me, the answer is no. Do I think he will get a contract for $55 million a year? My answer is yes. I think he will get that. And if you look at the other quarterbacks in the NFL, I mean, let's keep in mind Kyler Murray's cap number this year is going to be north of $50 million. I mean, you've got Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, and Deshaun Watson, all with cap numbers over $58 million. And the reality is, it may not seem this way because Tua has not quarterbacked the Dolphins to a playoff win, but the reality is he's 25. He led the NFL in passing yards. He has all the leverage. I was hoping, after the Dolphins lost to the Chiefs, that maybe he would settle on a Geno Smith 3-year, $105 million prove-it type of contract. That's simply not going to happen. And I'd probably lose a lot of respect for Tua if he asked for that, to be quite honest with you, too. So, the big thing as far as it relates to this offseason is that $23 million that he's scheduled to get. If the Dolphins were to sign him to an extension, typically when you do that, the first year, the cap number is taken down, as you guys know. So the Dolphins would probably end up with $10 million more to spend this offseason. But yeah, it's a high number. And if I had to predict, I think he'd get it.
I really have to laugh because I remember last year at this time, some people didn't even think he deserved getting that 5th-year option. And now we're sitting here talking about how he deserves top 5 money, right? So I think I kind of feel the same way as you, Kat. I mean, I sit there and I hear that number, and the first thing I think is, oh my God, like I love Tua Tagovailoa, but $55 million a year, like are you out of your mind? How long is this contract going to be? And I did look it up. Spotrac had predicted a 6-year, $302 million contract, which would be $50.4 million. That would put him top 5 right behind Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, and Joe Burrow as far as annual salary. And I mean, I got to be honest, I feel like that's right where he's probably going to get, right? I mean, right below him would be Russell Wilson making $49 million annually. You mentioned Kyler Murray. I think this takes into account his average salary over the year, which is $46 million. So Tua Tagovailoa definitely is going to find a salary in that area. And after leading the league in passing, after proving that this was how elite he looked when healthy, I can't really argue that he deserves it. I just know that when I first saw $55 million, I said, by God Almighty, I want nothing to do with that. But I mean, I love Tua, so here we are. He's going to get paid one way or the other, and whether you like it or not, right, Jake?
Mike Garafolo in his report said that indications are that both sides would like to get a deal done quickly this offseason so that it's not a storyline that hangs over training camp or the regular season. It's pretty impressive that this report instantly went that far into the season. Kat, I think you made a great point, and I think what helps make this contract digestible is the fact that early on you're going to create some sort of space to open up money, and that helps fill the timeline with a Tyreek Hill contract, a Jalen Ramsey contract, things like that. But Garafolo added that it might not be easy to negotiate and that it definitely won't be cheap. It makes sense, right? You said it. He's 25 years old. He led the league in passing. And you're the most valuable position in all of sports. All those things together make it seem like, all right, Tua might get what he wants. And Josh, we were talking before the show, and like at first you hear 55 million and you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, what are we gonna do? Like, he's not worth this much money. And then you mentioned, well, he could be worth a contract worth about $49 million, right beneath a couple guys, right above Russell Wilson, things like that. And when you really think about it and you really boil down the point, $6 million for a franchise quarterback in the grand scheme of the salary cap probably isn't a whole hell of a lot. And I don't know if it's really a position the Dolphins are going to die on. And that's why I do think that contract makes a lot of sense. But guys, are you surprised that Garafolo would even mention the idea of training camp or regular season? Because if we hear that the Dolphins want to get a deal done with Tua early on, it's as close to that March 7th deadline as possible. So you have cap space once free agency in the new year begins.
Yeah, I think it's the second part. The idea that the Dolphins don't want this hanging over their head, et cetera. I think that's more of a media narrative. They want the money to do something this offseason to resign the players that they have. And because any contract extension Tua gets, you can bet that he is going to see far less than $23 million in 2024. Obviously, he will get a lot more 2025 through whatever year it is, 2028, 2029, 2030, whatever the case may be. But that's why they would be looking to get this done sooner. To me, everything else is media nonsense.
And how do you think they kind of work with that? So think about it. Let's kind of build this Dolphins depth chart, Josh. If you have Tua and you're giving him this massive contract, suddenly are you still paying Mike White like $5 million to be the backup quarterback, even though he's throwing pick sixes when you're up 30-something points?
No, I think no, you're not mad at all. But wasn't he the one that threw that touchdown dot to Robbie Chosen? Shout out Robbie Chosen. I mean, yeah, you would absolutely not be paying him that. And I mean, we're sitting here talking about this, and at the end of the day, right, you're not going to find a better quarterback out there than Tua Tagovailoa. So the Dolphins are really in a rock and a hard place. I just think it's funny that, a lot of us are like, oh, we love Tua. And then when we hear that number thrown out there, we're like, okay, do we want to marry Tua, right? So, yeah, you're not paying Mike White all that money. And I guess that's what we'd end up doing, right? You'd probably bring in a replacement via draft, which we'll eventually talk about some of the prospects we like. But yeah, I think the Dolphins have to pay him this regardless of what we think. And again, you don't have a better option out there. They're not going to have a better option. We haven't seen a better option since freaking Dan Marino retired. So just deal with it, folks. Just deal with it.
And I'll tell you what, it's going to be interesting with Mike White and Skylar Thompson because, yeah, Mike White is due, I believe his cap number is $5.2 million. They have to pay him $1.5 million regardless. So they'd be saving at the end of the day 3.5 to 3.7, somewhere in that area. That becomes an interesting decision because is Mike White a solid backup? Yeah. And if Tua, heaven forbid, signs the extension and gets hurt, are we going to be saying, do we really need that $3.5 million? Did that really determine? But then again, on the other side too, Skylar Thompson, if Skylar Thompson's not ready to step in as the backup, what are we doing with this guy?
Yep.
So that also leads into the quarterback conversation too, where the Dolphins have a 5th, 2 6th, and a 7th. Maybe they can look at a quarterback there later.
Yeah, Skylar Thompson, I like that you brought that up for Mike White, that 3.5 mil, because I think a lot of people instantly just kind of chopped that off as like, that's how the Dolphins are going to get above the salary cap. But I think that's a good question to have if that value is there for that backup quarterback like Mike White. I'd say no personally, and I kind of consider the fact that probably the most valuable players are guys on their rookie deal, probably year 3 or 4, just because they've been in the league for a couple of years. They have experience and they're still on that rookie contract. Well, Skylar Thompson would be a backup quarterback who's entering his 3rd year on a 7th round picks contract. Now, would that be something interesting enough where he's had a couple of years to develop, he started a playoff game, and he should be the backup? Or is it even worth discussing the fact that you could save $906,000 if you cut him and save that on the salary cap? Is that even a talking point for Skylar Thompson?
That's a good question. I mean, Skylar Thompson, I don't think would be cut regardless. To me, he would if he's not on the team, it's that he didn't make the 53-man roster, and I think he's certainly good enough to make the 53-man roster. You know, the question is, to me, what it comes down to is, if Tua were to get hurt, are you going to lose additional games because you're going with Skylar Thompson instead of Mike White? To me, the answer is probably no. But that's up for debate.
Yeah, I think I'd flip a coin between those two, right? I mean, I think that's where I'm at this point. So I see exactly what you're saying. And to me, I think that's the biggest thing when we look at this price, right? I mean, Spotrac had 6 years, $302 million. This was Tua's first season fully healthy. I mean, has to be a little bit of a concern, right? When you're trying to give out all this money, right? I mean, we're sitting here talking about how Mike White could be expendable. You know, what about Skylar Thompson? I mean, we are 1 year removed from Tua Tagovailoa, and a lot of people thinking he might retire. So that has to factor into all this thing. You definitely need to have a better backup plan than but Dolphins have a lot of decisions to make. I think the decision on whether or not to sign Tua Tagovailoa, though, has already been made. And a lot of Dolphin fans, at least based on what I see on Twitter, they're probably going to be crying and a little bit salty, but it is what it is. And I'm going to enjoy it a little bit, I'll be honest.
Josh, you said it all. Let's take a quick break here. And on the other side, we'll get into some of the draft prospects for 2024. So stay tuned. We will be right back. We sit here. It is currently February 15th. And Kat, I got to ask you, Caleb Williams, is he number 1? Is this set in stone? Is it no longer a debate? He is the top quarterback in the draft. Basically, we look back to last year. Afterwards, people were saying CJ Stroud, Bryce Young. I'm not entirely sure, but there was a loud majority that said Bryce Young was 1A. So I want to put it in stone before all the smoke screen comes flying. Where is he locked into?
Yeah, I think he goes number 1. And, you know, it's a testament to him that this past year, it seemed like Caleb Williams had this awful season and he had, 30 touchdowns and 5 interceptions compared to where he was the year before. And, this is a great position for the Bears to be in because there's so many teams out there that need quarterbacks. And to me, they select Caleb Williams number 1, and they're going to trade Justin Fields, and I believe they're going to get somewhere between a first and second rounder. And I'm leaning toward a first rounder when you take a look at how many teams need quarterbacks, the Vikings, the Steelers. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think at the end of the day, Justin Fields becomes a Pittsburgh Steeler for that 20th pick. And now you're talking about the Bears having the first pick, the 9th pick, and the 20th pick in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this guy is as good as advertised. I think he's by far QB1, but I like what you said about Justin Fields. I do still think there's something there. I think a team like the Steelers, who could desperately need a quarterback, or some of those other teams that are drafting later in the draft, giving up a first, maybe a second with a compensatory, depending on how he plays. I mean, I think Justin Fields is going to be a stud, but you can't pass on a guy like Caleb Williams. He is that dude, right? He is that dude.
What am I why is Justin Fields worth this much? I understand the value of the quarterback position, but this is a dude who has 1 or 2 years left on his rookie contract. What am I missing here? Because not only is this someone, it's a rental or someone you're going to pay a boatload of money after seeing them for a limited time in your scheme. Why are we set on giving a first-round pick for Justin Fields?
Really the talent level and the need at the position across the NFL. I mean, look, Justin Fields, I believe in NFL circles, it's going to be categorized, and I think correctly categorized, that he went to the Chicago Bears. He went to a terrible football team that is known for bad offensive football. It made no sense this year where Justin Fields in 2022 is starting to look like the next coming, not quite Lamar Jackson, but a guy that can throw for almost 4,000 yards and run for 1,000. And then this year they start out by trying to turn the guy into a pocket passer. So that just speaks to the insanity of the Chicago Bears. And hopefully they don't wreck Caleb Williams too.
Can't really follow that up. I mean, I like the prospect, but Cat pretty much nailed it right there. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with Justin Fields, because I do think there's something there, and he just needs the right opportunity to really flourish.
The thing about Justin Fields, and I mean, you look at Patrick Mahomes just in the Super Bowl, throughout the playoff run, the famous line is being a playmaker, someone who's going to make chicken salad out of you-know-what in the times where you need it the most. But also, I think one of the issues with, or at least early on with Justin Fields, was just the simple stuff, making the simple throws and that consistency on a down-to-down basis. Are you comfortable knowing what Caleb Williams can do, not only being that special playmaker, but are you comfortable with him as that down-to-down pocket passer, or just someone who can make those open throws?
Yeah, physically he can do it all. And if you look at him in just the throwing motion, I understand why people compare him to Patrick Mahomes. But I also, on the other hand, start to roll my eyes a little bit when you're comparing an NFL draft prospect to an all-time great. And Patrick Mahomes is already that type of guy. And just to go back to Justin Fields for a second, I have to confess that I might be a little bit biased towards Fields, because the last Dolphins game I went to was the Bears-Dolphins game, where Justin Fields ran for more yards. He ran for more yards for a quarterback in NFL history in a single game.
That's true.
Right in front of me. I'm like 5 rows up, but no, I do think at the end of the day that the Bears are going to get a first round pick for Justin Fields and go with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, I like some of the way he, changes his arm motion and some of the things he does off script, but I cannot for a second compare anybody to Patrick Mahomes at this point. I mean, I think it was like 4 years ago, I wrote an article for 5 Reasons comparing him to Dan Marino, and that's kind of where I'm at. I feel like we're just going to – but Caleb Williams, man, that's a guy who can do everything, right? You mentioned he can be in the pocket. We see him legit using his legs as a ball carrier and things like that. So I think Caleb Williams is hard to pass up, and I think he will be that number 1 pick. I've written down he kind of reminds me of a globetrotter when he's out there playing the game of football.
Kat, at number 2, do you love the Drake, or is Jayden Daniels making a strong comeback here in the offseason?
I like all 3 of these quarterbacks in the top 5, and usually I have a gripe with somebody in the top 5 at quarterback, but not this year. I like Jayden Daniels more. He doesn't make the he can certainly make plays off script. He doesn't have the different arm angles that Caleb Williams has. That's the big difference. As a thrower, he's good, not great. But the difference with him is if you spread the field out wide, as many of these NFL offenses do, he can very easily, in Lamar Jackson-like fashion, tuck the ball down and get 30 yards. And that's why I think he's going to end up going higher than Drake Maye in the draft. That right now it's Caleb Williams number 1, Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels 2A, 2B. I like Daniels significantly more. I think he's an exceptional talent, and that the mobile component of his game is underrated. Drake Maye, the comparisons you're going to see over and over again are to Justin Herbert. I think he's a little bit less physically talented than Justin Herbert was, but I can understand why the comparisons are there. 6'4", 220 pounds. This past year, he had a good year, not a great year. I mean, back in 2022, he had 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, lost a couple of weapons on offense. And this past year, 24 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So a significant decline. But when you watch him from game to game, it's easy to see, when looking at what he had around him, why that drop occurred. So we'll see where these guys go. But either way, Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, Jayden Daniels, none of them are getting out of the top 5, and probably not out of the top 3.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Caleb Williams is by far the QB1, right? I don't think there's going to be any argument there. But after that, I mean, I came into this loving Jayden Daniels, have written down that he has high upside, dual threat. I love the way he runs the ball at times, almost like a crash dummy, right? He just takes some insane hits. But I was really impressed when I saw what Drake Maye could do. I think he might be the safer pick, right, between the two, perhaps. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can really be upset with any of these guys. I do like what I saw to Drake Maye. Did have written down Herbert, so that's a little bit of a cliche comparison there. But I think 1, 2, and 3, you can't go wrong there. And this is the future of the NFL, right? These guys, you're going to be talking about these guys for many years to come.
How would Jayden Daniels look somewhere like Washington, who currently has the number 2 pick? I was reading on Pro Football Focus that Jayden Daniels had one of the lowest turnover-worthy play rates in the entire nation last year. And you consider those weapons, it seems like he could do some fun things with his ability to kind of make these safe passes and then dink and dunk offense where you kind of mentioned it, Kat. You can spread the opposing defense out wide, and if he doesn't see anything he likes, you go win a one-on-one battle on the outside against a linebacker and take it 10 yards.
Right. And with Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels, to me, the traits that are hard to find, they have, the ability to throw, from awkward arm angles to playoff script. They've got that. And then from that point, if you have to rein them in and take the easy stuff, I feel confident in their ability to do that. And yeah, Jayden Daniels, Heisman Trophy winner this past year for LSU, 40 touchdown passes compared to 4 interceptions, and on the ground, 1,134 rushing yards and 10 more touchdowns. One of the best years from a college football quarterback I've ever seen. And I think it does translate. Now, the interesting thing with him is if you look before this year, he was a transfer from Arizona State from a couple of years ago. We're talking about him being 2 years removed from a terrible Arizona State team where he quarterbacked an offense to 10 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. But I tend to not hold that against somebody, who's 19 or 20 years old. I tend to look at more of the ascension of that prospect throughout the college ranks. And nobody was better in college football last year than Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, even at Arizona State, though, you could see some of that, what he brought to LSU and just kind of flourished with. I will admit the thing that makes me really sick and throw up a little bit in my mouth is all these mock drafts, right? Have Jayden Daniels seemingly falling to the New England Patriots. And, we're talking about how talented he is, how he's kind of that dual threat, this new age of NFL, how it's just almost a cheat code to have that type of quarterback. I don't know about you, but I do not want to see this man in New England. I do not want to see him have any part with that New England Patriots organization.
No, me either. And look, I don't know Jayden Daniels off the field, anything, but I do have a stigma that just everybody at Arizona State is drunk all the time. So I don't know if that's the case with him, but to me it's a party school, and he got away from that. That's the narrative I'm choosing to believe. But no, he's a talent, and he's going to go in the top 3 picks.
He's been picking up momentum as that second pick recently. So let's kind of follow that road a little bit and think about this. Like Drake Maye, he kind of feels like that pocket passer. And you mentioned Justin Herbert. I even reading about him kind of felt Josh Allen early in his career, just someone who's gunning the ball everywhere. He's going to throw some interceptions. Drake Maye seems like he might be a little helpless somewhere in New England, where it's a lot of guys who don't get a lot of separation and an offense that really struggles to push the ball down the field and give their quarterback some simple, easy looks.
Yeah, Drake Maye to me is a higher floor type of guy, and Jayden Daniels has the superstar upside. So from that point, if you're the Patriots, it would scare me if Jayden Daniels went there, because he is somebody that I believe can single-handedly take that offense, make it his offense, and be a superstar quickly. Drake Maye might be able to do that too, but I see him being more of a really solid quarterback, a Matt Ryan type of guy with that type of career, which is fantastic. But is he somebody that's going to drag an organization that right now the Patriots are in shambles? Is he going to take him kicking and screaming to a championship in a couple of years? Maybe no quarterback can do this, but Jayden Daniels has the ability to me to throw the team on his back a little bit more than Drake Maye does.
After the top 3 there, though, that's when we can really start getting cliche. These are the guys that everybody passed, and these are the guys who are going to remember everybody who was drafted before them, and all those different scenarios. And, I look back to 2012 and how much of a difference having someone like Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson just does for your cap space, right? Having a first-round quarterback is fantastic and locking that in. But if you can get those guys in the second, third round, it's a complete and absolute game changer. I don't think we're there quite yet. Kat, where are you thinking someone like Michael Penix is going to go?
So after the top 3 guys, I have kind of an unpopular take on the next 3. where look, I see some mock drafts where them going, I saw JJ McCarthy going 12th and Michael Penix going 13th. And and look, both Penix, JJ McCarthy, phenomenal seasons last year. I don't take anything away from them. But as prospects, this reminds me kind of the 2022 draft, where we just kind of assume that like the Sam Howells and the Desmond Ritters would get pushed up the board and be selected mid to late first round. And then draft day comes and they fall to the third, fourth, and fifth round. I believe that's what's going to happen to all three of these guys, because when you get past the first like 40 picks in the NFL draft, and that's right about where Will Levis went. I think he went 34th last year. When you get past the top 35 to 40 picks in the NFL draft, I don't care what team has what pick or how few of picks they have. The NFL universally has agreed that you are not a franchise quarterback, that you are a project. And we'll see if that's the case with Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, and Bo Nix. And I think that will be the case. And once those teams have agreed that you are not a franchise quarterback, there is no limit to how far that quarterback can fall. Remember a couple of years ago, Jake Fromm from Georgia, at this time a few years ago, projected first round in mock drafts, ends up falling to the end of the fifth round. Sam Howell, first pick of the fifth round a couple of years ago, after being projected, a top 10 pick at this time 2 years ago. So I believe that's what's going to happen, is that you're going to start to see these guys not get drafted in the first round, but falling to the second and third round. And to answer the other question that you didn't ask there with the Dolphins, I would not take one at 21, and I would not take one in the second round. And it's after really watching all three players with an open mind. I have different reasons why I would not take them in the first and second round.
Yeah, hard for me to argue with any of that. I mean, I'm sitting here watching these guys, and it was hard for me to really pick out which one, stood out above the rest. And, if you're a GM, you're pretty much planting your flag on one of those guys becoming that dude. I mean, for me, I guess it just comes down to one team, right? One team that might see a JJ McCarthy and might buy into what John Harbaugh said. Didn't he say it was like could be the number one QB1 or some crazy stuff like that? I mean, all it takes is one team, seeing the right fit and going out there and reaching for one of these guys. But I was sitting here trying to decipher who's QB3, 4, and 5, and it was hard as hell for me to do that. Man,
Bo Nix and Michael Penix have been in football and college football forever.
I feel like they're my age.
Okay. Michael Penix's first start was the same year Adam Gase was coaching the Dolphins back in 2018.
Wow.
He was at Indiana for 4 years. Okay. And he transferred to Washington last year, and it obviously played absolutely lights out the last 2 years, 67 touchdowns, 19 interceptions, Heisman Trophy candidate. The thing with Penix for me, though, is my comparison to him is just going way back is Byron Leftwich, where he is I think is a escapable version of that, and obviously a left-handed version of that, but he has an awkward throwing motion, and he needs a lot of pocket space to plant his foot and get the ball where it needs to go. When he has that time, it's a beautiful throw. He has a great deep ball. The nose of the ball is out and toward the sideline. It's a perfectly thrown ball, but you need to also be able to give him time to throw the ball there too. So he's got the big arm. I like him more than Bo Nix. Bo Nix last season, 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, absolutely insane. But I think he really lacks the physical upside. That's why I think he's eventually not going to go in the middle of the first round, but end up going closer to late day 2, even though he's projected in mock drafts to go a lot higher right now.
I think you can see some of these guys start to fall when you think about the limitations. I mean, Bo Nix specifically, you think about the 45 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. I mean, he was behind the best offensive line in the entire nation for that. And if you're drafting, early in the first round, breaking news, I don't think you're a good football team. So, I mean, if you're trying to take someone, Bo Nix, even in like the second round near the top, you do start to wonder if they're going to be in a situation. I mean, I think I go back to like someone like Brandon Weeden. You mentioned just a couple older guys, and I just go to situations where, all right, it could work if everything's kind of nicely placed around them. But a lot of these scenarios, you aren't going to see that, and especially if someone wants you to play in the first or second round.
Brandon Weeden. Well, he was old when he was drafted. He was 28. He was 28. That was the same draft as Tannehill. That was the 2012 draft. So that dude's 40 now. Like, that's crazy. But yeah, look, you watch Oregon on Saturday, and I mean, you can just go game by game with Oregon. There are not a lot of contested throws on tape from him. And when you combine that with how he fizzled out at Auburn and the physical limitations, I mean, you can talk all day about 45 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, but I don't see how a Dolphins fans, even if they're the biggest Bo Nix supporter, can form an argument that Tua is not the guy because of the physical, because he's limited in other areas. The quarterbacks, he's not Josh Allen, he's not Lamar Jackson, but Bo Nix is going to be the guy. I don't see how you can get to that point.
Kat, you're sitting there on the clock, 3rd round. JJ McCarthy's there, and you're the Dolphins. Are you thinking about it?
So Dolphins have a first, a second, a 5th, 2, 6, and a 7th. So, no. But hey, in the scenario, let's say they trade down, acquire a 3rd rounder. JJ McCarthy would be interesting in the 3rd round. And listen, if we're talking about what the Dolphins have given backup quarterbacks over the years, I mean, Jacoby Brissett, Mike White, is that equivalent to a 3rd rounder? Yeah, I think it is. So you're talking about JJ McCarthy, somebody who's 20 years old, who is still rounding into form. Right now, he is a hyper competitive, athletic game manager. That's what he is right now. But the arm talent, to me, is not even at the level of Bo Nix. As far as arm talent, it's among the second tier. It is Michael Penix by a long shot, then Bo Nix, and then slightly below him, JJ McCarthy. But he does have the mobility. So still, I mean, that would be interesting in the 3rd round. I would still end up passing there. I would be looking at a few quarterbacks here a little bit later in the draft that I don't think are, my opinion, it's an unpopular one. I think they're closer to this second tier than a lot of other people have them.
I think Stephen Ross is going to override everyone. He's going to take J.J. McCarthy at that 2nd round pick. I mean, we're sitting here talking about Penix and Nix. I mean, those guys are a little bit older. I do think J.J. McCarthy is that younger guy that maybe you can develop and has a little bit of that mobility that the NFL game loves. But I'm with you, man. I feel like after those top 3, it's just a drop-off. And I'm intrigued to hear some of those later round prospects because I keep joking about Spencer Rattler, so I'm not going to keep getting into that. But what are your thoughts on some of those other guys? Jake, did you say what you thought of McCarthy? Would you take him if he was there in the 3rd?
If you're trading back to the 3rd, I'm fully on board. Not to be that guy with what Kat will go with here. I'm under the impression that I don't think you should use any pick before that 5th round pick on a quarterback. But Kat, you make a great point. I mean, even Teddy Bridgewater, they brought in so many backup quarterbacks where they are making a point like we got to invest in that position. Well, the best way to invest in that would be something like if you could trade back down into the 3rd. But when we're looking at the combine and different quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler comes to mind. You got Michael Pratt at Tulane. Kat, are there any other guys you're going to have highlighted there that really could make or break performances at the combine for maybe like a 5th round pick?
Yeah, I don't think Michael Pratt, Jordan Travis, Spencer Rattler, as far as size or physical attributes, I don't think what they're going to do matters much. I mean, maybe throwing the ball, but that's it. But that really is that 3rd tier. And that's the tier that, to me, the Dolphins should absolutely be very open to in the 5th, 6th round. And I do think a quarterback of some value is going to be there. Michael Pratt from Tulane, of that 3rd tier, is probably my favorite. And I tweeted earlier that when I watched him, the name that kept coming to mind was Jay Fiedler. And, really Jay Fiedler with a little bit of a stronger arm. But you take a look at what he did with that Tulane program. I mean, nothing jumps off the page. 2,400 yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, but a really good chain mover. And he's not great in one area, but he's not poor in one area. His mobility, his arm strength, his throwing motion, I'd say all of it is a B+ across the board. So, and when you take a look at just over the last 20, 25 years, these quarterbacks that have somehow fallen through the cracks and been day 3 stars. I mean, Brock Purdy, Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins, and a Russell Wilson was a 3rd rounder, but same thing. What do they all have in common? They played a lot of college football. They played at a high level, and they came in the league experienced, and their physical attributes, it turns out, were underrated. And I think Michael Pratt falls in that same area, as well as Jordan Travis from Florida State.
Hard not to get excited about Jay Fiedler, right? Wasn't it the last time the Dolphins won a playoff game? I mean, and then you mentioned Jordan Travis. I think that was on the last show. I mean, he's a guy that's probably getting overlooked, right? Suffered the injury. I think he was kind of the whole reason that the Florida State guy wasn't in the playoff, right? I mean, because of his talent not being there. So that's an intriguing name that could fall. But for me, I'm going to continue to go to Spencer Rattler. And I don't know if it's just because, at one point he was that 1st overall pick. This is a kid's show, so I'm not going to say what I don't know if you guys saw what his logo looks like, but his logo is an S and it looks like it's an S and an R, but that R looks like it's a snake with a what. So I'm behind Spencer Rattler, intrigued by what he can bring. He has that mobility. Landon Greer's best friend. What are your thoughts on Tua's brother? Either of you? Do you guys like Tua? I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Tuli? How do you say it? Someone help me out here.
So I'm not even going to try. It's that they're both Tua as far as I'm concerned. I watched him a few games. Nothing really jumped out, but he did get better this past year. So you might be looking at a late round draft pick, but he's not really on the radar for me personally.
Last big quarterback out of Maryland?
Oh, man.
I think we just answered the question with that.
I'm trying to think.
Do you have the answer to that? I got nothing. I'm trying to think.
Who was drafted out of Maryland who was a quarterback? Oh, man. Maryland quarterback. Man.
That's going to bother him. He's going to. I'm
looking up right now.
Anyway, team but Maryland.
Yeah. I like Pratt and Jordan Travis physically a little bit more than Spencer Rattler, because I feel like both Pratt and Travis get a little bit more of their throwing motion like from their legs. So they're able to push the ball out, I think, a little more accurately, a little more consistently. But Spencer Rattler too brings a little bit more of that dog that we've seen. I mean, we're talking about somebody who back in the 2021 draft, if he had a great year at Oklahoma, we would possibly have been talking about him as a top 10 pick. He had a bad year. Things have fallen down so far for him now that he's this projected late round pick. He's starting to look kind of underrated at this point. So I expect him to go somewhere on day 3, and Pratt and Travis will probably go there too.
I mentioned at the top, but before we take off here, Kat, is there one piece of advice you have for us to not eat the cheese over the next 2 months? Is there something that maybe somebody's going to get overhyped at the combine over these next couple of months just because we get so bored talking about this stuff? We need to make someone suddenly seem super interesting. Do you have any cheese we should not eat?
I'd say Joe Milton from Tennessee if I had to pick somebody, because when he gets to the combine, he's going to be 6'5", 235 pounds. But he went to the Senior Bowl, had a terrible week, and he went to Michigan, he transferred to Tennessee. He had a good season. I mean, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, ran for 300 yards, but this was his time to differentiate himself. And he didn't do it. But as far as just 2 other guys too, I mean, one guy that's bounced around a lot is Keto Slovis, BYU's quarterback, and he went from USC to Pitt to BYU, and again, a guy that has a really compact throwing motion and is accurate. And he doesn't stand out in any area. He's not a great athlete. He's overall been a disappointment as a college football quarterback, but again, kind of that same pathway as a Spencer Rattler, where now he's a little bit underrated. And another guy too is John Rhys Plumlee from UCF, not invited to the combine. It's not pretty watching him get the ball out and throw the football, but he's a really good athlete and can make plays with his legs. So if he can get with the right quarterback coach, he might be worth a 6th or 7th round pick.
Kat, I think after talking a little college football with you for about a half an hour to an hour. I feel a lot smarter. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We're going to continue to do this all the way up until the April draft. What are you feeling next? We'll keep it simple. Go to running backs.
Yeah, well, I say running backs next, and man, I'm looking through this list here. I'm back to 98 for Maryland. I don't see a quarterback yet. Good Lord,
Josh, I think you're doomed,
dude. Okay, found Neil O'Donnell, 1990.
Who could forget?
I could. that was before my time. So 98 is where I really start. I think there may have been a quarterback I missed somewhere in here, but man, it's we may have to combine running back with another position because it's a weak running back class. I mean, one of the worst I've ever seen. So we'll see what happens.
Next year should be good, right? Next year's is looking good.
Yeah, it's looking more promising next year. But you may not see a running back drafted in the first 2 rounds this year.
Wow. Cat and Houtz, gentlemen, you have said it all. Thank you all so much for listening to another edition of Another Dolphins Podcast. We will be back with the new show early next week. But until then, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.